Hi again, everybody. It's Kevin Knessa coming to you live from the newsroom of The Observer and TheObserver.com on this, the 6th day of May. And there he is already, ready to go. The one and only Tony Mondero with this week's weather forecast. Tony, I'm sorry we are late. Thank you for being here and your patience today.
Oh, my pleasure, Kevin. No problem at all. And I'll tell you, one more day of rain. We'll have a nice Thursday. We have a wet Friday, but a nice weekend. Mother's Day weekend looks fine. But let's set this up. In the short term, the National Weather Service, Storms Prediction Center, has issued a severe thunderstorm watch for western New Jersey. So if you're living north and west of 287, Sussex, Warren, Harlan County, down into the Philadelphia area until 8 o'clock. A severe thunderstorm watch simply means any thunderstorm has the capability of producing winds up in excess of 58 miles per hour and maybe up to 1 inch hail or even greater. So if you're out in that area, especially if the sun has been shining out there today, be careful for some strong storms. For our weather, look for periods of rain. Could be locally heavy at times. We'll rule out some drizzle and fog like we've had the last couple of nights. High temperatures today in the mid to upper 60s. Overnight lows tonight, 58 to 62 degrees. Tomorrow, some periods of rain, perhaps a slight chance of a thunderstorm. Some may even break out later in the day as this upper level low pressure system finally clears out of the area. Uh, High temperatures tomorrow near 70 once again. Overnight low temperatures near 60. Nice day on Thursday. Pleasant day. Sunshine. Plenty of it. Temperatures in the low to mid 70s. Overnight low temperatures in the 60s. That rainy day Friday. And then the all important Mother's Day weekend. Highs in the comfortable low to mid 70s. Low humidity. Nice comfortable nights with low temperatures in the 50s. And it looks like that finally we'll get some decent weather after so far an inch and a half of rain, maybe another inch or so, depending on where the heaviest rain band set up over the next 24 to 36 hours, and then it's out of here. So, Kev, a short abbreviated weather, and I'm sure we'll have more next week. Back to you.
Tony, I'm sorry that we had to do it this way. I had to interview Father Joe earlier, and it went a little bit longer than I expected. But I will make it up to you next week. We'll go much longer next week, and we'll talk about the Mets and all the other stuff. Right?
Absolutely. And let's go, Mets.
Let's go Mets. There he is, Tony. Thank you. I'll talk to you later. Okay.
You got it, Kev.
All right, there he is, the one and only Tony Mondero, the longtime director of the Harrison Weather Center. He joins us every Tuesday so that we can go over the weather forecast for the week. And that was an abbreviated version of it. And I apologize that it was so quick. But one of the reasons that it was is because today I had an opportunity to sit down with Father Joe Mancini, the pastor of St. Stephen's Church in Kearney, to discuss the upcoming conclave. And boy, is this going to be an interesting couple of days, to say the least. But don't let me speak for it. I'm going to turn it over to Father Joe. And then when we come back after that, we have a few things to talk about as well. But without any further ado, here's my talk with Father Joe Mancini, the pastor of St. Stephen's. Hi again, everybody. It's Kevin Knessa coming to you from the newsroom of The Observer and TheObserver.com on this, the 6th day of May in the year 2025. And I am honored to be joined by Father Joe Mancini, the pastor of St. Stephen's Church. Today, he's going to join me today to talk about the Papal Conclave, which begins tomorrow. So here he is, Father Joe Mancini.
Hey, Kevin.
Father Joe, thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Happy to do it.
We are just a few days. We're a day away from the
Mm.
conclave beginning, and there are so many things that will be happening between now, tomorrow, and the days that follow. So let's start from the beginning. You know, what happens tomorrow in Rome when the conclave begins?
Well, the cardinals that are gathered in Rome for the election of the new pope, and it's important to say there's about 252 cardinals around the world, but only those who are under the age of 80 by the first day of the conclave, which is tomorrow, are eligible to vote. So there's of those 252 or so, there'll be 133 what we call cardinal electors, and they come from all around the world. So the cardinals are going to gather first in St. Peter's Basilica tomorrow morning, and they're going to have a mass for the election of the Pope, and it invokes the intercession of the Holy Spirit to come in, to come into them to help them discern what is God's will for the Church and who they believe should be elected as the new Pope. That will take place about 10 o'clock in the morning, Rome time.
Okay.
And as I'm sure many of your listeners know, that Rome is 6 hours ahead of us. So if anyone wants to get up, I'm sure EWTN is going to be carrying the mass, but it'll be 4 o'clock our time. But then what will happen is at 4:30 in the afternoon Rome time, so 10:30 a.m. here in the East Coast of the United States, the cardinals will gather in the Pauline Chapel, which is a part of the Apostolic Palace in the Vatican. And there they will listen to an exhortation by one of the cardinals. And then they're going to process into the Sistine Chapel, which it's not a long distance. They're kind
Right.
of next to each other,
Okay.
In the conclave of 2013 that elected Pope Francis, it was the first time that media cameras were allowed to record those proceedings. So we were able to see the procession from the Pauline Chapel into the Sistine Chapel. And while the cardinals are doing that, the choir, the Sistine Choir, is chanting the Litany of the Saints in Latin. It's a beautiful chant. So if I haven't heard specifically, but I'm sure that too is going to be broadcast on television for people to see.
Right.
Once the cardinals have processed into the Sistine Chapel, they have some procedural things to take care of, one of which is an oath that each cardinal takes. They've taken an oath of secrecy to this point, and then they're going to give that oath, which you have up there on the screen. They do it in Latin, and the English translation is there, and that further cements, if you will, binds them in their secrecy, that they cannot reveal anything that happens from that point on in the election of the new pope. So then what happens after each of the 133 cardinal electors have taken that oath? The papal master of ceremonies, Archbishop Diego Ravelli, will give the order, everybody out, basically throwing everybody out who doesn't need to be there.
Right.
He does it in Latin. The term is extra omnes. And there are people that are in the chapel to this point. Some of them are photographers. Some of them are bishops. Some of them are staff members, other papal masters of ceremonies. They leave, and the doors are closed and locked. In addition to the cardinals, Archbishop Ravelli, as the master of ceremonies, is allowed to stay in the chapel. And there'll be a reflection given by Cardinal Renario Cantalamessa, who up until recently was the preacher of the papal household.
Okay.
He too is allowed to stay in, but he can't vote because he's over 80. So he's giving the reflection, but he will not be able to participate in the vote. And so on the first day, there'll be one vote taken of all the cardinal electors, and then they will count the ballots. And if no one has been elected, they will retire for the day. And that would bring an end to the first day. So there will be smoke tomorrow at some point. I'm guessing at about 7:30, 8 o'clock, 8:30 Rome time, which would be like between 1:30 and 2:30 our time. But very rarely has, I don't think ever, has someone been elected on the first ballot.
When they get together and they have the first vote and they tally the votes, the
Mhm.
vote tally has to be a certain number of cardinals who vote in favor of one candidate. How does that work?
Yes. So the requirement that is set forth in the Constitution for electing the Pope is a 2/3 majority. So from what I'm hearing, that it's going to need 90 votes,
Okay.
133 cardinals. A third of that is like 44 point something. So the 2/3 is around 90, 89 or 90. And it's actually it's an interesting thing, you know. It's three cardinals from the 133 are chosen by lot prior to the ballot, and they will serve as what's called scrutineers,
Okay.
so that when uh, each cardinal is given a card, and on the card is written in Latin, I choose as the supreme Roman pontiff, and then there's a line, and they write the candidate's name who they want to vote for. Then, when everyone has finished voting, each of the cardinals, and there's a certain precedent that they cast their votes. I actually posted that on my Facebook page. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who is the Secretary of State, is the first one to cast his ballot,
Okay.
and it's done in precedent. They have the cardinal bishops, the cardinal priests, the cardinal deacons, and we can go into that a little more about in a few moments.
Sure.
But they go up to they leave their seat. They go up to the table that is placed in front of the altar of the Sistine Chapel, and the scrutineers are sitting there. And there's it doesn't look like it. They call it a chalice. It doesn't look like a chalice that we're
Yeah.
used to seeing, but it's a container. They place on the top of the container their ballot, and they're saying something to the effect of, "I choose as the supreme pontiff the one who I believe God has called," or whatever the words
Right.
are. They say it in Latin, and then they tip the plate so that their ballot falls into this container, this vessel. When all 133 cardinals have elected, and you can imagine that's going to take.
Oh God.
Did we freeze?
Yeah, we froze. Okay, we can pick it up from there. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
Sorry about that.
So it does take some time for each of them to go up to say what they have to say, cast their ballot, they return to their seat. Once all 133 have cast their ballot, then one of the scrutineers takes the vessel, takes the chalice, shakes it to mix them up. He pulls out a card and he announces the name written on the card. He then passes it to the scrutineer to his right, who also announces out loud the name that's on the ballot. He passes it to the third cardinal, who's on his right, who pierces the ballot in the middle with a needle, and it's kind of pushed onto a thread, a
Right.
red thread, so that by the time all the ballots have been counted and announced, they tie this thread together, so you have it's like a wreath of
Yeah.
these of ballots, and that's how the ballots would be burned. What's interesting, from what I'm hearing, one of the cardinals who is eligible to vote is too infirm to actually go into the Sistine Chapel,
Right.
but he has a right to vote. So, from what I hear, he's staying in the residence, the Domus Santa Martha, where all the cardinals are sequestered.
Right.
And someone from within the conclave will have to go and bring him a blank ballot, wait for him to fill it out, and then bring it back. And that too gets counted.
Wow.
Ballot in the election. So that may take a little bit more time. I don't think that's been done in recent years,
Yeah.
maybe 78. But then what happens, again, like I said, very rarely is the new pope elected on the first ballot. So presuming that no one has reached the majority at that point, the ballots would be burned in the stove, in the furnace, which was just set up on Friday by the Vatican Fire Department.
Right.
It's not a permanent fixture. Anyone who's been to the Sistine Chapel might be looking for the famous furnace, but it's not there. It's only brought out for the conclave, and they put a special chemical which would produce either the black or the white smoke, depending on the result of the election. So if at the end of the first day there's no one elected, the cardinals, as I said, will retire. They'll go back to the Domus Santa Martha, and then they'll return on Thursday for the second day of balloting.
I had heard, and I don't want to ever quote any type of media, but that the cardinals are encouraged to, I don't want to say mask their handwriting, maybe, so that in case when they're being read, somebody might be able to interpret who's writing the ballots. Is
Sure.
that a reality that you know of, that they're supposed to kind of like fake their handwriting at all a little bit?
I've heard that myself, and I've heard it from several sources. So when you hear something like that from a couple sources, it's probably true to a
Yeah.
certain degree. Um, but whether it actually happens, I don't know. But I did hear they're encouraged to do that so as not to kind of tip off who's voting for whom.
Now, when they put the written ballots on the thread in the needle that you had mentioned earlier, do
Mhm.
they burn them after each vote, or does it happen at the end of each day if there's going to be an
Right.
entire day of voting?
Sure. So on Wednesday, they'll burn it right away because it's the only ballot being taken. And it's also important to note that while the Cardinals can make notes, they can keep their own tally as the names are being read. All of the notes are supposed to be collected and burned along with the ballots to maintain that level of secrecy. What will happen on Thursday is, again, presuming no one's elected tomorrow, on Thursday, there'll be two ballots in the morning. If no one is elected, they'll break for lunch, little siesta, and then there's two ballots in the afternoon. Um, if so, if we say that Thursday morning, the first ballot does not produce a winner, they immediately go into the second ballot on Thursday morning.
Wow.
If And then all of the ballots from both voting sessions, along with the notes, would be burned at that point. So it's not after each. So it's not. There's not going to be four times of smoke on Thursday.
Right.
It'll be one or two, depending on when they have it. Now, obviously, if someone is elected on the first ballot of Thursday morning, they'll burn them right away with the white smoke chemical, the canister. But if no one's elected first thing Thursday morning, they'll have the second ballot, and then they're going to burn the ballots no matter what. It
Right.
would be black or white, depending on the result of the second vote.
If you're just joining us, Father Joe Mancini is the pastor of St. Stephen's Church in Kearney. He's joining us today to talk about the papal conclave, which begins tomorrow in Rome. Now, other media outlets do this a lot. It's pointless in a way, but there are a lot of names that have been thrown around as possible successors to Pope Francis and St. Peter. Have
Mhm.
you seen any names? Have you heard any names that are possibilities as papabile, as they say? Or is that something that you as a priest say, nah, I don't even know if I want to go there?
I can tell you two names I have not heard. They are Canessa and Mancini. So you and I, Kevin, are safe,
Right.
and we can continue to root for the Mets and the Devils and find joy or depression in each, depending on the season. But
Exactly.
yeah, I hear the names, and my experience has been that those who are promoting certain names really don't know what they're talking about.
Okay.
There are obviously some, what we might call front runners, the papabile, as you say. The bottom line is I don't know. But they're names that you would hear no matter what. Obviously, there's certain cardinals that are more in the spotlight than others. Like I
Yeah.
mentioned, Cardinal Parolin, the Secretary of State. He's, if you're, I think someone I forget which group it is, but they have it's a betting agency, right? They have him
Sure.
as the lead candidate going in, and I if you look back at the past, 1978 was interesting. That was the summer of, or the year of three popes and two
Right.
conclaves. Paul VI died in August. John Paul I was elected. He died a month later, and John Paul II was elected. But if you look back at that, people would say that John Paul II, the Polish cardinal Karol Wojtyła, he wasn't on anyone's mind,
Right.
and he emerged onto the balcony. Benedict the 16th, when John Paul died, Cardinal Ratzinger, going into the final days of John Paul II's life, from what I've read, Benedict wasn't really a consideration because of his age. And what some of the the experts, the so-called experts, some of the Vatican watchers said
Right.
was that what really clinched it for Benedict was the homily he gave, because he was the main presider and homilist at John Paul's funeral.
Right.
That's what clinched it for him. A lot of the cardinals came to Rome undecided. I mean, listen, after 27 years of John Paul, who are you going to put in there? You
Right.
know, how can you replace a giant like that? And but they went in and they wanted Benedict. And in the conclave of 2013 that elected Pope Francis, there was some talk that Cardinal Bergoglio, Pope Francis, had come in second place in the 2005 conclave to Benedict, to Cardinal Ratzinger. But they thought that maybe his time had passed, and he came out. So he wasn't really a papabile at that point, but he came out. So I think Kevin. There's an old saying: "He who goes into the conclave of Pope comes out a cardinal."
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
so I think it's a wide open field, and especially this time around, Pope Francis appointed over 100 of the cardinals. There are some Benedict appointees, there are some John Paul appointees, but Pope Francis never brought the cardinals together to meet one another. So there's this past week in Rome, since the funeral, when many of the cardinals have been coming, they've been having what they call general congregations to talk about the needs of the church. Everyone's allowed to say whatever they want, whenever they
Right.
want, give their opinion. This has really been a feeling out period, I think, for the cardinals. One of the beautiful things that Francis did, he appointed cardinals from the periphery, from places that traditionally had never had a cardinal, from places that probably would never dream of having a cardinal
Yeah.
as the bishop. And he opened, I think, the church's collective eyes and heart to all those places around the world. So I had to laugh a little bit because on the social media platform X, Catholic News Agency was showing daily the videos of the cardinals arriving for their general congregation meetings, and they're just walking the streets of Rome around St. Peter's Square, and some of these guys are surrounded by the paparazzi.
Oh yeah.
They've probably never had that experience in their life,
Yeah.
so I think it's all a bit overwhelming. But from some of the reports and not every cardinal gave an interview, but some did. It said it's been a really valuable time in these past 10 days to get to meet one another and to talk and to share, where they think God is leading them with the election of the new pope.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to ask you a question about the priests of the archdiocese and the priests of the world.
Mhm.
Do priests themselves have somebody that they would say, "Wow, my life would be wonderful. I would be so happy if this guy were to become the next pope." Is that something that happens, or is that something that you just kind of like leave it alone?
I think we all have an idea of who we'd like, who would be best for the church, you know, but very often that falls along um, ideological lines.
Right.
If a guy is more traditional, conservative, obviously he's going to want a more traditional, conservative pope. If he's a little more progressive, he's going to want someone who's progressive. You know, I think a lot of people know where I stand
Yeah.
in terms of ecclesiology, but the bottom line is this, and this is what we need to do. And I mentioned this yesterday to the people at morning mass. We need to pray that God will give us the pope that we need,
Right.
not necessarily the pope that we want. Because the church, as you know, Kevin, is so complex. There's
Oof.
so many different levels and layers and thoughts, and everybody wants everything done on day one.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be the case. And we can, in that sense, it's very political. When a new president is elected, everybody wants everything overturned and changed and put into place day one, and
Right.
it doesn't happen that way.
No.
There has to be discernment, and most importantly, there has to be listening. We have to listen to everybody, and what is God telling us? What is the Holy Spirit telling us? And it might mean that sometimes we have to change a little bit, and so I think that I wouldn't I'd be lying if I said priests don't care. Yeah, we do. We
Sure.
kind of want someone who's really gonna listen, and we call the Pope the Holy Father for a reason.
Right.
We want someone who is going to be a father, not just for priests, but for all people.
Right.
Catholics. We're his children.
One
God's
of
children.
one of the people who will be perhaps written on a ballot, is a man who you know very well, Cardinal
Mhm.
Tobin.
Sure.
Why is it that Americans are whenever we get to a conclave, whether it was 2005 or 2013, everybody always says, "Oh, there will never be an American pope,"
Mhm.
because I think Cardinal Tobin would be a wonderful pope if ever given the chance, but it seems like it's never going to happen with an American. Why is that, Father Joe?
I think a lot of that stems from history. People back in the presidential election of 1960, which was before my time, before yours, I know,
Right.
but we hear things, we hear stories, we read. There was a real, genuine concern among the American people that the Catholic candidate, John F. Kennedy, who was probably the first Roman Catholic to have a real legitimate shot at winning the presidency of the United States, that he was going to be beholden to Rome, to the Vatican. And President Kennedy, before the election, really had to work hard to convince people that that was not going to be the case, you know. And America has traditionally, historically, been a superpower. We look back at our history, and I think there was a fear, healthy or unhealthy. It's up to the beholder,
Right.
but a fear that there could never be a pope from a superpower like America, because those ideals, those values, those, shall we say, politics would prevail over what the church was about.
All right.
I think, I don't know if you'd agree with me, Kevin, or if anyone would agree, but I think that stuff is stuff of the past.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's the case so much anymore. I think that I believe at some point there would be a pope from the United States. How long did it take for there to be a pope from South America?
Hmm.
Well, Francis, he was the first one.
Right.
So thousands of years. Will it happen in our lifetime? I don't know. Could it happen in our lifetime? Sure. Could it happen this time? Sure.
Sure.
Would it be Cardinal Tobin? I don't know.
If it were Cardinal Tobin, what kind of pope would we be getting? If I'm putting you on the spot, you could tell me to shut up right now, Father Joe. I get it. I get it. Because you may have to go back and work with him again.
Right. You would get a man who loves God. You get a man who loves the people. I've been privileged to work with him, as you said. I'm his master of ceremonies. So, I'm with him at a lot of the major celebrations of the Archdiocese at our cathedral, um, especially for the Chrism Mass, Monday of Holy Week, the ordinations of priests and deacons, and when we have them, bishops, but also, the Mass, the wedding anniversary Mass for married couples,
Right.
the cemetery Mass on Memorial Day. So he has a real love to be with people and to talk to them, and he's genuinely interested in you. And I've heard this said from other people that when they're talking to the cardinal, sometimes if we're doing that, we may get distracted by something going on. He's focused.
Right.
He's focused on the individual. The Blue Mass that's held at the cathedral every year for the police officers. Very often there's families of officers who have lost their lives in the line of duty. He's right there. When we had back in March, we remember the shooting death of Officer Joseph Ascona in Newark, the
Yeah.
funeral at the cathedral. And the cardinal, before we began, wanted to see the family.
Wow.
And, listen, I have to say that myself included, you have a big funeral, you may not be thinking of that first. You might be, let's get everybody in, let's get started. He wanted to go and talk to the parents and the family first before we started. Um, so he has a, I believe, a pastor's heart, you know, um, and I think that he would put people first and listen to them and help them and do what he could to help them.
Sure. Whenever I watch his homilies, which is anytime the cathedral will broadcast them on YouTube, I've always had the sense that he is talking to me directly. I've always felt that in my heart. Do
Mhm.
you get that sense that he just, when he's speaking to people, he gets them?
Yeah,
Is that a fair assessment of Cardinal Tobin?
I think so. I think so.
If you're just joining us, Father Joe Mancini is the pastor of St. Stephen's Church, and we are talking about the conclave. This time tomorrow, the first vote probably done by now, right? About this time, because it would be about 7.
Mhm.
Um, what other things do people need to know about the conclave? Is there anything else we haven't touched upon yet that people should know about what's going to happen in the next couple of days, Father Joe?
Yeah, I think that one of the things is, and this might be so far into us. We live in such a technological age now, right? That part of the secrecy, the cardinals have to turn over their cell phones, their iPads, their laptops. There's to be no outside communication. Um, and a lot of that stems from, again, history when governments and emperors and dictators would try to influence the cardinals, to vote one way or another. In fact, the rooms at the Santa Martha residence where the cardinals will be staying, the windows are sealed. They can't even open the window to get fresh air. So that's again to do for part of the secrecy. A big part of that secrecy is, and some people will say, well, why do we need all the secrecy now? Why can't
Right.
they this that? It is a sacred duty. It's a sacred task. When you consider that, of all the people in the world that could vote for the Pope, it's only 133 men. You know, and so they and I know they do take that very seriously.
Sure.
I think that's a big thing, and again, it's so far to what we might think, or to where we would be with, well, if I wouldn't do that, I would do this thing.
Yeah.
It's important.
I'm not sure if I were a cardinal, I would want people to know exactly how I voted anyway,
Hmm.
especially if the person you voted for doesn't ultimately become the Holy Father. That could make a very difficult situation. So
Sure.
I kind of get why there's always been that secrecy
Hmm.
in the conclave, and I kind of hope it stays that way. I don't think I
Yeah.
would. I think I'd be a little weary if people started talking about who they voted for, and oh, my guy didn't win, but
Right. Right.
and I could see that being problematic. But on
Yeah.
our way out here, I'm sorry. Go ahead,
I
Father
was going
Joe.
to say, I wanted to tell you in preparation. We spoke about this last week, so I've had a couple of days to prepare.
Yeah.
Part of my preparation, because I'm diligent that way, Kevin.
I know
Uh,
you are.
part of my preparation was to watch the movie The Conclave,
Okay.
because I'm sure that people would have make some comparisons, and I have
Yeah.
to say, it's a movie, right?
Yeah.
Some of what they depicted in the movie is not 100% accurate, so I wouldn't want people
Right.
to base their impressions of the actual conclave
Right.
as to what they saw.
The
But
the secret cardinal, especially, right? I mean, there would never be a
yes,
secret cardinal.
yeah, and the way that works, is before, it's what you're referring to, Kevin, is the cardinal created. The Latin term is in pectore,
Right.
which is in the heart of the Pope. For whatever reason, he couldn't announce it out loud at the time he created this man a cardinal. But interestingly, he would have to make it known publicly before he died, in
Okay.
order for that cardinal to be allowed into the Sistine Chapel. I mean, I could just show up and say, "Oh yeah, Pope Francis made me a cardinal in pectore," but I wouldn't want to.
Right.
It's a little too much.
Well, have there been cardinals who have been created in pectore, or is that something that they made up as well?
No, there have been.
There have.
I
Okay.
don't. I don't remember exactly. I think that there may have been during John Paul's reign, and again, 27 years, so there's a good chance,
Sure.
that he did create a cardinal in pictore, because where that cardinal or where that bishop or that priest was assigned at the time, to make it known publicly, would have been dangerous for that man's life, for his
Sure.
safety.
Okay.
So, but I again, I don't know if there is, if it. I don't remember if it was ever
Okay.
actually done publicly, but I believe there must have been, because it's registering in my mind at some point that
Yeah.
we have done that.
Yeah, plus there was the term is legitimately a term in
Mhm.
pectore from the
Sure.
Latin, right? Which I
Yeah.
guess means in private, but
Yes.
it does seem like it must have happened at some point in time. I don't want to get off the movie, but is there anything else about the movie that that stuck out to that you'd want to talk about?
Well, I'm not going to give away the ending for those who didn't see it, but that was a little far
It
fetched.
was a little ridiculous. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, when at one point when the Cardinal Lawrence, played by Ralph Fiennes, he was allowed to use a computer to look at something, and I don't think that would have been that would have violated the oath of secrecy
yeah.
because it was an outside influence.
Mhm.
Uh, but just yesterday, the other all of the lay members who are going to be working within the confines of the conclave, not in the chapel itself necessarily, but
Mhm.
like the ones who are providing the meals for the cardinals at the residence, the drivers of the buses from the apostolic palace to the residence, some of the Swiss guards, there's physicians and confessors. They all had to take an oath of secrecy as well.
Ah, okay.
That was
Uh,
done last night.
that was already done. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, I have a final question,
sure.
and I don't want to put you on the spot with this either, but at the end of the conclave, when the cardinal comes out onto the balcony, I believe it's the senior cardinal, is that right? Who makes the announcement of the new Holy
It,
Father?
it's the senior cardinal deacon.
Okay,
Um, I had mentioned earlier that there's three. So cardinals are cardinals, right? They all
right.
share equally in the rights and obligations of a cardinal. But within the College of Cardinals, there's three different ranks. The first is cardinal bishops, the second is cardinal priests, and the third is a cardinal deacon. The cardinal bishop traditionally holds it's a title, we call it a titular post, a title post of the dioceses just outside of the city of Rome,
Right.
which are no longer dioceses. They were traditionally, they were like the first dioceses of the early church, but they're no longer dioceses. So there's no cathedral, no people, they don't live there. They're more symbolic. And there's six or seven of those cardinal bishops. The next rank of bishops, cardinal priests, that's the largest group. And typically, the cardinal priests are bishops somewhere else in the world. They
Okay.
have, like Cardinal Tobin is a cardinal
Right.
priest, Cardinal Dolan is a cardinal priest. People may have heard of Cardinal Erdo from Hungary. He's a cardinal priest. Um, but what it was in ancient days, the cardinals came from the clergy of Rome. So every cardinal priest, to maintain that traditional continuity, is assigned a parish in Rome that they are an honorary pastor of, let's say.
Mhm.
So, like Cardinal Dolan in New York, his titular church in Rome is Our Lady of Guadalupe. Cardinal Tobin, obviously the Archbishop of Newark, his titular church in Rome is Our Lady of the Graces, Santa Maria delle Grazie, very
Wow.
near to the Vatican museums.
Right.
The cardinal deacons, uh, again, traditionally, historically, they help to run the practical affairs of the church, but they're more the Vatican officials. So the senior cardinal deacon, who this time around is Cardinal Dominique Momberti from France.
Mhm.
He's the head of the Apostolic Signatura, which is like the Supreme Court of the Vatican.
Right.
He's the one who gets to announce the name of the new pope. So once we see the white smoke, it might take about 30, 45 minutes or so for Cardinal Momberti to appear on the balcony. He's assisted by masters of ceremonies, and he'll say in Latin, "There you go.
Mhm.
I announce to you a great joy. We have a pope." And then he'll say the pope's name, his Christian name, and then the name that he's chosen as pope. Now, if Cardinal Momberti doesn't appear on the balcony and it's another cardinal,
Mhm.
then we'll know that Cardinal
That he's the
Momberti is
Pope.
pope. Yeah.
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 What
And
would you?
actually,
I'm sorry.
his name has gained steam today, just today in the press.
And what's his first name?
Dominique Dominic.
Dominique. So if we
Yeah.
hear Dominique.
Well, the
Well, no,
liberal Latin,
in
so
Latin.
Domenico or Dominicum.
Dominicum, right? Yeah.
Well, the thing is, if he doesn't appear on the balcony to
We know
announce,
anyway.
you know,
Yeah. What would you say about the name the next Holy Father chooses? Because there's always
and
a story behind it. There's
sure,
one
yeah,
name, they always say will we ever see a Peter the Second, number one? And what about whoever is chosen?
yeah. Well, with regards to the first question, Kevin, the legend is that if a new pope takes the name Peter,
Right.
that is supposedly the end of the world.
Oh, God.
So
Okay.
we would hope there's no Peter too.
Okay. Okay.
um, yeah, the naming of the Pope is very interesting because in a lot of ways it reveals what his agenda, if you will, would be. Pope Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, was the first pope in history to take the name Francis. Now, interesting, he didn't come out as Francis one. They didn't
Right.
say take the name Francis, Francisco Primo,
Primi.
Francis one.
Yeah.
It was Francis.
Yeah.
Ideally, if there was a Francis two, that's when Francis one would kick in. But a lot of people were surprised by his choice of name, and he explained that it was for Francis of Assisi, who spent his life, his ministry dedicated to the poor, focusing on the poor, and that became one of the main hallmarks of Pope Francis's papacy: a real concern and a love for the poor. Other popes, we know John Paul, right? When John Paul I was elected in 1978, he chose to honor his two predecessors, John the
Right.
23rd and Paul VI, by having the double name. And what's interesting, if you and you could find this on YouTube, with the election of John Paul I, he was announced as John Paul I.
Yes.
And supposedly he had said to someone that because they said, well, you shouldn't take the name John Paul I because we don't know if there'll be a John Paul II. And
Oh.
he says, I'm taking the name John Paul I because soon enough the second will come along.
Oh, God. Boy, did he ever curse himself with that, huh?
Yeah,
Oof.
yeah.
Oof.
There's of course been Pope Pius. He was before John the 23rd. Benedict's. John is the most common name, but I think it does reflect a little bit about the direction that the new Pope wants to go. For all the Star Wars fans out there has been a Pope Lando. That's
Wow.
pretty cool. Right? Many years ago. But it wasn't always the tradition to take a new name. I don't remember which pope it was or how long ago, but the first pope to change his name, his birth name was Mercury,
Right.
Mercurius. And he didn't want to be pope with the name of a pagan god. So he changed his name at that point. But I'm biased. I'd like to see a Pope Stephen.
Sure.
I don't know if there's been a Pope Joseph.
I would see my next question there. I don't think I ever remember hearing of a Pope Joseph, right?
No. But people say, "What name would you take if you were a pope?" I have no idea.
Yeah.
What again? It's not that they're going to listen to this conversation, but where do we want the church to be? What do we want the church to be?
Sure.
Continuing with the poor, and I think you can make a case for. I think you can make a case for a Pope Stephen. He suffered the persecution of those who wanted the church to end.
Yeah.
And there's some that would say that's where we are right now. We see a lot of what's happening against Christians, especially in the Middle East, against Catholics. Pope Michael, I think you make a case for a Pope Michael to defend the church from evil.
Sure.
But also too, you look at it, we have to be looking outward too. It's not just looking inside, but looking out and seeing what do we, how much of a force will the church continue to be in the world? Hopefully a strong one, a positive one that reflects the mercy of the Father and the love of Jesus Christ.
Sure. There's one name you missed.
Kevin?
Ignatius.
Oh,
Sorry, I
Kevin,
had to.
You know me.
I
You
know
know
you.
me, that was done on purpose.
No, of course it was. Of course it was. Ignore me, everybody. Ignore me. That was completely
It's an
intentional.
inside joke, I think, right?
It is. It is. It is. It is. So please accept it as that and nothing else. I
Right,
promise.
right.
I promise.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Father Joe, I could probably sit here for another 3 hours talking to you about this, and I have enjoyed every second of this.
Right.
Before we
I
wrap
enjoyed
up,
sharing.
really, is there anything else you would like to say before we
You
sign
know,
off?
I would just, this is such a unique time, for Catholics, for the world. In the last, what is this, 47 years, we've only had four conclaves.
Right.
So this is something really special, something I think that can generate a lot of interest. I would just encourage our listeners, our viewers, the readers of the Observer, to tune in to anything that's happening beginning tomorrow, and certainly, we've talked about this, Kevin. We're gonna here at St. Stephen's, we're gonna be ringing our bells once we see the white smoke, once we get word of the white smoke. So hopefully, it won't be too early in the morning. The neighbors won't be happy,
Exactly.
but we certainly hope to do that, to share our joy with the new pope who's being elected, and we pray for whoever that's going to be. It is a tremendous task. On Twitter or X today, they one of the guys that I follow had posted a video of the residents, and some of the cardinals are starting to arrive,
Right.
sequestered, and he said 133 cardinals are coming in. One will never leave.
Wow.
Yeah, he's giving up the life he knows for the life of the church.
Could there be a greater sacrifice other than the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus made? That
Sure.
is really remarkable to hear it in those terms.
Mhm.
And Father Joe, let's do this again when the new Holy Father is chosen, and we
Sounds
could
good.
talk a little bit about that. But thank you again for this.
And
And
and Kevin, if it's somebody that we like, maybe we can do it from Rome itself.
oh yes, oh yes, I'd be happy to make that trip. I would love it because you may have a new job if that ever happens.
Exactly, exactly.
The new pontifical master of ceremonies
Oh
from
boy,
Rome.
don't let that
Oh,
get out. Don't let that get
I won't tell a soul, I promise. All right, Father Joe, stand by. Everybody else, we will see you in a few more minutes after we take this break. Bye-bye.
Sometimes we know what's next.
Next.
Other times, it's impossible to know what's next. Don't be caught standing by the next time someone's heart stops.
Call 911. Call 911.
Call 911.
Knowing CPR takes you from bystander to lifesaver. Join the Nation of Lifesavers by learning CPR at heart.org/nation today and be the next lifesaver.
It is 44 minutes past the hour. Kevin Canessa back live with you here on the Observer Live. It has been a long broadcast, and I have to be honest with you. I had an absolute blast. I was involved in the church when I was younger. I was an altar boy. I was very close to becoming or entering the Jesuits back in 2001. I was a Jesuit associate, actually, and ultimately decided against going into the priesthood. Sometimes I regret that, sometimes I don't. But anytime I get a chance to speak about the church and things that are going on is a joy for me. And when you get to do it with somebody as gregarious as Father Joe, it becomes that much more joyful. And I really, really enjoyed getting a chance to do that. So I want to thank you all for watching. Now, it's late in the day, and we've been on the air for 49 minutes or so. And what I'm going to do is I am going to wrap it up for now. And then later this evening, I'm going to come back and go over some other things that I didn't get a chance to get to yet that are not related to the conclave. But there are plenty of things that I am interested in talking about today, including a policy from Meta that you all need to know about because there's somebody out there who doesn't know how to comprehend what the policy is, but everybody needs to know about it and a few other things. And then, of course, we have this week's edition to talk about as well. So I will put an announcement on our Facebook page and our other social media pages so you know when we will be live, but we will be back later tonight with plenty more on the Observer Live. But that's going to do it for now. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me today, and especially want to thank Father Joe Mancini for his appearance, and as always, Tony Mondero for joining us for the weather at the top of the broadcast. But we'll be back a little bit later today with plenty more to get to. But until then, we will talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you in a few hours.